Welcome in, everybody, to the Important Nonsense Podcast. 32 teams in 32 days. Once again, we had so much fun doing it last year, Neil, that we decided to bring it back, revive it for another season. How you doing, buddy?
2022 edition, baby. We got to inform all the casuals.
Exactly,
We
and
gotta get everybody
we
prepped.
got larger too. So we didn't want to share all the fun ourselves. So we brought in Mike Manning. Mike, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, not only is it back, it's bigger. So, the last one has to be better, right? That's what we're going for. So,
I mean,
see
that's
how it
the
goes.
goal, but we'll see if it actually works out that way, right?
Oh, I figured this was more like the failing marriage, where they bring in the third person to try
Are
and
you trying
spice
to say
things
that
up.
Mike is really our couples counselor?
Yeah, well, I was
Or
gonna
we're
say
swinging Mike.
Mike's more the guy you bring in for
Got
the
it.
swingers, and everybody still
Got
gets
it.
I was
divorced
like-
anyway.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I didn't know if you were going for me to help, by talking you through it or in the bedroom or something.
No, I meant more like in a key party type of way.
Mhm.
That's more like what I
There
meant.
it is.
That's more.
This is exactly where I expected this to go within 1 minute of us
Yeah.
starting. So
I'm glad
it's
I could live up to expectation.
already the hot start. So again, our usual deal for those that didn't catch these last year, we pre-record these ahead of time. So when you're watching this is in the past. We are recording these on 7/20, July 20th of 2022. Everything we do here on the website is always PPR related, and 12 team is your league format. So just the general settings that we normally work with. 2 wide receiver, 3 starting wide receiver, whatever. We fluctuate in between. There's so many flexes in so many leagues now that it doesn't really matter. You really want 3 wideouts no matter what. But PPR and 12 team is mainly the thing to keep in mind when we go through all of this stuff. So it's A to Z for the most part, with one very large exception. And we are starting at the very beginning with the Arizona Cardinals. So there's the depth chart from our website. Again, shout out to our guy, Jack Kavanaugh, for the beautiful work, as always, putting together our depth charts. Best in the industry, for sure.
Buy a Jack shirt, please.
Yeah, please do. I've got this shirt on as well. The Trust the Process one. I'll back up a step. There you go. There it is. The shop.importantnonsense.com. And then you saw on there the Patreon as well. That's the main way. Come talk to us in the Discord about any of this information that may entirely be outdated by the time you see it. But for the time being, we'll assume that it isn't. And we'll start at the very top with quarterback. Kyler Murray, there shouldn't be much debate here, right? Like Kyler Murray, the only debate about Kyler Murray is, do you consider him a tier 1 guy? Because the biggest question mark about him last season was just the health, right? He tweaked the ankle. He missed a couple of games and then wasn't really himself the last half of that season, but he still put up top 5 numbers. So are you scared? Are you worried at all?
No.
Yeah. I mean,
not to bury
Not
the
really.
lead. But
I mean, in general,
we've already stepped on each other. Go ahead, Mike.
there you go. Perfect. We've done it.
In general, we know that we had to got to take at least a couple minutes to get used to each other, right? It's not like we've done podcasts before.
Never.
None that were PG-13 enough to air.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the Murray situation, he was on an MVP pace. Hurts his ankle. He threw 3+ touchdown passes in 4 of his first 8 games. Got hurt, missed a bunch. Didn't throw 3 touchdown passes in a single game after that. Like, is it ideal? No, but his upside is just that the rushing Konami code quarterback that he's impossible to push down your rankings, really.
Right. And like I said, I think the real debate is just tier 1 or not. For me, he is a tier 1 guy still. I still have him in the same area as Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. And again, the Konami code, Jalen Hurts, I have in that top tier, which is the controversial one. But to me, those are the top 4 that I know I can rely on week in and week out on a points per game basis. They're the guys that give me the home run shots. And with what they've done with the guys we're going to talk about here on offense around him, it's hard not to like what he's going to be able to do this season. So I feel like quarterback's really an open shut one.
Well, not to bury the lead, but you and I both have him projected to start 16 games, not really worrying about re-injury or anything like that. And it's funny because I actually have the same mindset going into quarterback this year. The tier 1 is those 4 guys, and unsurprisingly, it's the 4 guys with the rushing floor.
Yeah.
So if you're going to splash out at quarterback, that's how you got. That's just the way it's going to have to be this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it only gets slightly more controversial as we move down the page. Again, and the other thing I always like to mention in these is quarterback, the backup QB. It's Colt McCoy. And we did get to see a couple of games last year when he played. Not bad. Streamer worthy, like was in the 12 to 15 range in points per game. So if you were desperate for somebody to fill in for Kyler while he was out, he filled that role nicely. He also was a good streamer in like DFS play for those weeks as well. So it's just worth knowing he's the backup if anything were to happen there. All right. Running back. So last year they had the two-headed monster with Chase Edmonds and James Conner. At least that's the way it was supposed to be on paper. Then Chase Edmonds gets hurt. James Conner gets the full workload, and they say, hey, this is working. And Chase Edmonds is never heard from again. He's shipped off on a boat to Miami, signs in free agency. So now it's just the James Conner show. He is now the guy. They signed Darrell Williams away from Kansas City, who had flashes. He was okay. And they still have Eno Benjamin kicking around. They made a 6th round draft pick you can see on there. But again, there are different players behind James Conner than before, but this is still the James Conner show, right?
That's the way I view it. I've got him at 14, ranked as RB 14 for the season. I pulled your ranking, Steve. You've got him at 16. Mm-hmm. I think both you and I more or less view him as the guy. Yeah. He's going to be the alpha and the omega. And it's just a question of how much do the other guys even get involved. And frankly, that's really where the conversation I think is do you even want any of those other guys as far as fantasy? Is it worth it to handcuff it? If so, who? It turns into that pretty quickly. But I think you and I both view, not to speak for you, but I think you and I both view James Conner as a very high end RB2.
Yeah, he's in the he's at RB 15 right now in ADP, which makes sense. To me, I think this is a key reason why you look at the tiers and why I break down my stuff into tiers, because you have like the guys that I have are in quote unquote like a purgatory in between the RB1 and the RB2, and that's Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, David Montgomery, and Cam Akers. There's just so many questions about those guys. Like, can Etienne come in and essentially in his rookie year with a year off be the guy and jump into a top 10 role? Will Alvin Kamara be suspended half the season?
Right.
Can David Montgomery not fall apart being basically the only running back in
Did you
Chicago?
Say you have him in tier 3?
So that is my tier 3.
Okay, because I also have James Conner in tier 3 with some of the other names you mentioned. It's the
James
guys that
Conner
are good, but
is the top of my tier 4.
Okay.
The veteran running backs who should be the guy that have upside, but they're the older guy. So Connor Elliott, Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, that's a majority of that tier. And that's the way I break it down. That's like the back end of my RB2 is where I have James Conner, because it's a guy who you're going to be able to rely on. If you want to punt running back early and go heavy wide receiver or double wide receiver, tight end or something, like you want to go Kelsey or Andrews early, and that's the way you want to build your team, that's fine. Connor is a guy you can get as your RB1 and feel okay about it, because he's someone you can consistently rely on and get him in like the 3rd round, something like that. I think mid-3rd right now in his ADP. Yeah. So right now I'm still good on Connor. I know there's people fading him, but this is the one time. For years I've said he's one of the most overrated players in the league, and now this is the one time where I'm like, all right, this is appropriate. This feels right where you've got him. I will take it.
So fade James Conner.
Mike, I mean, you are slightly biased on James Conner here. You rooted for him for so many years, but we will take your opinion anyway.
I mean, yeah, watching him in Pittsburgh, the last time he was healthy for a full season was his sophomore season in Pittsburgh when he took over for Le'Veon Bell. Yeah. It is not his MO to play as many games as he did last year.
Right.
So that's something to look at. They also, as we saw, that he didn't take a lion's share of the snaps in general. It was a two-headed monster for most of the season, and he mainly thrived with the red zone touchdowns. He led the league with 15. It was just red zone central was like there. He was the one they relied on the most, but he still didn't have like over half their red zone carries. So it was like efficiency in the red zone between Kyler Murray's ability to take it, like to fake taking it out, and the gadget plays that Cliff Kingsbury would do. It got Connor open plenty, and he also was very good at once they inside the 5 to just bulldoze it in. So it's going to be, does he see a touchdown regression? It's very likely, because that's I think it was 18 or something overall. That's a big number. And as we saw with the receiving stuff, he didn't see much.
18 total.
Yeah, he didn't see much when Edmonds was healthy.
Right.
He had like 13 targets when Edmonds was healthy. He saw 22 when Edmonds wasn't healthy. He's good at doing those things. It's just not something he's been asked to in Arizona thus far.
Right.
So it's going to be, does Darrell Williams take some of the red zone work like he did well in KC? Does Rondale Moore take some of the receiving work, or one of the other backs that are solid receiving backs, including Darrell? So
yeah,
Jack
has Darrell Williams listed here as the third down back. So that there is a certain amount of sense that makes.
They signed him to a 3-year deal at a good contract for a running back.
Right.
So they're going to want him to be around and be healthy for the long haul.
Right. I don't know. Is there anything else at running back we really care about, though?
No, I'm just not convinced it really matters based on the ranking. I'm not like Darrell Williams is more. It's a nice thing, but it's not really something that I'm like, oh, you have to make sure you handcuff James Conner to Darrell Williams. Like, no, and I'm not really worried about either him or Moore.
Right now, Darrell Williams, RB 55 in the ADP, 155 overall. So you can have him for basically nothing.
Right. So if it works out that way, great. But I'm not saying you have to do this.
Yeah, a solid late dart throw that you're going to say, it's one of those running backs that you may not trust the health of the starter. So you figure, okay, that's why Alexander Mattison for so many years has been thought of as one of the top handcuffs to get, because Cook missed several games basically every year.
Well, yeah, but the thing with Madison has always been that he has the talent that if he ever got a job somewhere, he would be potentially a top 10 guy.
Yeah, and I don't really feel that way about Darrell Williams. Darrell Williams is just barely better than being a guy.
I mean, Mahomes loves him.
Great. He's great.
Mahomes loves lots of weird stuff. I'm not basing it on.
Mahomes loves Kansas City.
Yeah.
I've been to Kansas City. No, thank you. There's no accounting for taste, Mike.
He's not quite, he's not a top tier handcuff, but he's like a poor man's version of the injured starter.
I think it's more interesting as insurance policy, maybe, but to me, I'd rather have him in best ball. As a late round grab.
I can see that.
As there's 2 or 3 weeks where he's suddenly getting the full workload and is valuable to me, as opposed to I want to waste a bench spot on him in a regular like redraft or dynasty league on a weekly basis. But I don't know. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, I think you could do better, frankly, as you're filling out the back end of your bench. And I'm not really worried about either him or Moore cutting into enough of what James Conner's going to have to matter. It'll actually probably help keep Conner healthy, not because that's always been the problem. You can't ask Conner to do literally everything. Historically, that doesn't go very well. And you brought it up, Mike. They did sign him to a 3-year deal. They're not going to kill him in year one. Like they're going to keep him around.
Well, that's been the difference between in Pittsburgh and in Arizona. Pittsburgh, he was the workhorse.
Oh, I remember.
Back. He was down. He was in the red zone. He was on receiving downs. He was every single down on the field.
Yeah, because your alternative was putting Anthony McFarland in there, and we've all seen how that looks. And it's like, so what else would you do? If I was running the Steelers, I'd do the same thing.
Tomlin's whole career has been, I'm gonna pick a guy, and he's gonna be my guy since about for the past 5 years or so, at least, since Le'Veon Bell and since James Conner and now since Najee Harris. All three of those guys that were picked by Tomlin were thrown in. You're the guy. Get everything done. If you get off the field, it's just to catch a breather and get right back on.
Yeah. To me, it's like that's the load management thing they're going to do, to use a bad. I think they're going to literally load manage him a little bit. Let Williams do some of the work, give a little bit of the early, especially early in the season, give Moore some stuff. But the only other question I would have at running back, and if no one cares, we can just move to wide receiver. But does anyone have anything to say about Benjamin? There's been a lot of weird smoke recently about. I know, Steve, you're well past the Benjamin train from several years ago.
Benjamin has gotten his opportunities, and he's never been able to actually succeed. So
I'm just bringing it up because there's a lot of weird.
I think he's more of a depth body and a special teams guy than he is actually fantasy relevant.
There's been a lot of weird narratives and smoke out there on the internet recently because it's Lion season about, Benjamin's going to be way more involved than people think, blah, 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 blip, blip, blip. I'm just trying to see if anybody has an opinion on that. It sounds like our advice as a site would be, just ignore that.
Yeah.
Yeah, your roster would have to be like miles deep.
Yeah, you'd be playing in a 16-team league with 20-man benches.
Yeah.
All right, we're moving on. Wide receiver. Biggest splash move of the offseason for the Cardinals was they went out and they traded their first-round pick to get Hollywood Brown, to give them another wide receiver to go with DeAndre Hopkins, who is suspended. Even better. So he is petitioning that. He filed an appeal, but he's going to serve a suspension of some kind. It's currently 6 games. I think it'll be at least 4, but it's currently 6, so that's what we're preparing for. Hollywood Brown comes in to be, in my opinion, the number 2 to Hopkins. But what bothers me here is Jack has both of them on the left side. There's no way that when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, AJ Green is going to be playing over DeAndre Hopkins on the right side of the field. So clearly, I would just reorder that in some way, shape, or form. I don't care how you do it. That just needs to be fixed in some way.
He might just be having it like that for 6 weeks, and then he'll change it once the suspension is over. Like, he's not here to defend himself, but I could make that argument.
This is the best time to take a shot at him because he's not here to defend himself. And then, of course, my guy, Rondale Moore, still in the slot. So I had this as a breakout season for Rondale Moore. Clearly, that is not going to happen anymore. I can still dream, but I highly doubt that'll be the case. But let's start with the, I guess, quote unquote, one for at least 4 games at the beginning of the season. Hollywood Brown. Neil, what do you think about him coming over here from Baltimore?
I think it's a really logical choice to go ahead and reunite Kyler Murray with someone he played with in college and clearly has a rapport with. They seem to really get along, especially because Hollywood Brown has kind of been somewhat of a malcontent at certain points in his career. As we know, he famously was beefing with the Ravens coaching staff and was playing terribly while he was doing it. Yeah. That we might see how that ending to this, but it won't be this year, not in year 1. Especially with the opportunity for him to just walk right onto the field and be the best wide receiver they have for 6 games. Let's see how much of a rapport they can get together. I pulled the rankings. I have him for the season, Hollywood, at wide receiver 24. You have him at all the way up at wide receiver 18. So I was actually going to flip this around and see if you had something to say, because I'm fine with The idea that Hollywood
I have
Brown
him
will
at
probably
wide receiver 18, and that's lower than my projection for him. I have
Yeah,
him
I know.
projected
I
at
know.
wide
Your
receiver
projection was even higher. I wasn't even going to get into that. I was going to let you talk about that.
Well, before I do that, Mike, do you have anything about Hollywood, who you had to watch twice a year?
He's a fine player. The drops were overblown last year
Yeah.
because of the situations and when he dropped. Like the two in Detroit are always brought up that were like 30-yard touchdowns right into his hands.
Right.
And so his dropping is not terrible. He doesn't have the best hands in the league, but he's going to be an average wide receiver when it comes to that. He last year saw one of the lowest rates of catchable deep passes in the NFL, which is crazy for that a player that is
I
meant
was
to be a
waiting
deep.
for someone to break out Twitter's sexiest stat of the offseason.
Yeah.
And there it is.
Well, and then he had a big difference between when Lamar Jackson was under center and when Tyler Huntley was under center.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson loved to look at him when it came to the red zone and always take those deep shots to him.
Right.
Huntley did not care at all to do that. He went straight to Mark Andrews basically every time. Brown didn't catch him with Huntley under center. So I'm wondering if, is this rapport with Kyler Murray that he had back in college going to rekindle quickly? Because they thrived in like the middle of the field, intermediate to deep, which would be great for them because that would complement Hopkins great. It would complement Rondale Moore and Zach Ertz great too.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it.
They're hoping for. I don't know if it's. I do think he's gonna have a good season.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there. It's the Ravens had as a team the lowest deep ball completion percentage in the league last year, and Kyler Murray had the best deep ball completion percentage in the league last year. So now you add Hollywood Brown's speed to this offense, and I think it's hilarious too because they're just rotating pieces here. Like last year, the whole offense was DeAndre Hopkins is the deep threat. Let him run down the sideline and let AJ Green be your possession wide receiver on the other side. And now they saw that Hopkins has lost a step. When he comes back from the suspension, he'll be in that AJ Green role of being the possession receiver over the middle, and Hollywood Brown will be the guy running down the sideline with his hand up. So I think they're just going to run the same offense they did last year with Brown in that primary deep threat role, but with his hands, DeAndre Hopkins in that possession role, I still have on a points per game basis as a top 10 wide receiver this year. So it's just a matter of how many games is he going to miss and when is he going to come back. But when he does, I mean, him being the quote unquote number 2 in this offense makes him even deadlier than he was before.
I get all that. The only question, and there'll be ample opportunity for them in the beginning to put up gaudy numbers with Hollywood Brown. My only question becomes interpersonally. When you start trying to, it all sounds great on the chessboard that you're laying out there. When you start adding people into that and their emotions and their quote unquote what they think they're capable of, football crap, that's when you start getting things can start to get really ugly. Because if Hollywood Brown thinks that, oh hey, I'm the deep threat, I should be the guy. I'm younger. You brought me here for a reason. As DeAndre Hopkins, target monster DeAndre Hopkins, guy who is used to getting all the volume in the world, who will still be getting a lot of volume. Will he be willing to play nice in the sandbox? Because I agree with you. If everybody does their job and plays nice in the sandbox, it should go that way. The one concern I have is if people don't necessarily program up with their new roles and how this should work, is it going to work that great, or is there going to be sparks everywhere and people are mad and the drama bleeds onto into the actual results of the game? It can happen. Like it's not enough to where I'm like I'm moving anybody in my rankings. It's just something I would think about if you're going to get heavily invested in Cardinals wide receivers for this season.
Depends on how much you think they're going to throw the ball
to make too. Because I mean, they'll have to make a decision at the end of the this season at least, with Marquise Brown's contract. I think he's on his final year, while DeAndre Hopkins has, I think, 2 years left on his major deal, but there's an out after this year. So if they can't it's going to be almost impossible to have both of them. I feel
that's what I
at
mean.
The rate,
Yeah.
You got
At the
a
rate that they're going to
problem
be paid.
brewing here in the background because of that type of stuff. I don't like doing that because it's kind of narrative-y and it's kind of noise. But there is a certain human, like
And
if I'm
Browns
HR,
reason-
if I'm HR, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the conflict mitigation that you're going to have to do as Cliff Kingsbury to make sure everybody plays nice in the sandbox, and then decisions get made from there. What were you going to say, Steve?
Oh, I'm not as worried about it, just because, like you said, essentially they're both auditioning for contracts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think there's any way, to Mike's point, that they can keep DeAndre Hopkins on his current deal. They're going to get out of that at the end of this season. I think they pay Hollywood Brown to stay, assuming he has the season that we think he can. And then essentially Rondale Moore in that slot role becomes your quote unquote number 2, and you find some other possession receiver that isn't AJ Green or DeAndre Hopkins. Somebody else fills that void for you. We just don't know who. And Hopkins moves on to somewhere else. That's ultimately, I think, what happens. But both of them are going to be auditioning for a role. It's just what role are they going to have?
And where, potentially. Yeah. Do we want to talk about Rondale Moore a little bit more here very quickly? Because we're
it's a
we're
good
at that
name
point.
to know,
Mhm.
but I mean, really, that's it. A lot would have to happen for me to love Rondale Moore this season.
Yeah, you have him at
It's
wide receiver 56. I have him at 64. I know, Mike, you wanted to talk about what his role changed, especially in the short term with Hopkins being out. I think he probably will get asked to go down the field a little bit more with Hopkins not being there. But then once Hopkins comes back, I think he goes back to his old job, work the middle and take some handoffs. So I'm not. It's hard for me to get excited about it.
Kingsbury has done all this talk during the offseason about how great he sees Rondale Moore looking and how much he loves him and stuff like that. But he was literally a just scream wide receiver last year, and that was it. He led the NFL among wide receivers in targets behind the line of scrimmage. And I think if you went for how many targets he had in general, like 75% of them were behind the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, no fantasy production is really going to come from that.
Yeah.
And before we go to tight end, the only other thing I have is, as it relates to Hopkins, to put a fine point on it. Steve, you have him at 28 for the season. That builds in a healthy, kind of, I don't want to say regression because it's not the right word, but you've hedged it nicely. I've got to account for the suspension. I've got him at 32. ECR's got him at 38. I think there's some potential value to be had with Hopkins because I think people are scared as far as redraft goes.
Right now, his ADP is 33, which is mainly why I have him ranked there. Just because I want to jump ahead of ADP to get him, because like I said, when he gets back, I feel like he still is a wide receiver 1 points per
What that
game.
tells me is the public is a little bit less scared than some of the experts are. The experts are a little.
It tells me that the public recognizes his name.
Okay. You know what? Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That's how ADP works. Last and certainly least, tight end. And you can get your Abolish the Tight End t-shirt at shop.importantnonsense.com. Zach Ertz is the primary. However, they did spend a 3rd-round pick on Trey McBride. It's a name to know for the future because we all know rookie tight end is a waste of your fantasy stock. Do not do it. Is Zach Ertz the safest late-round tight end in drafts this season? Neil, we'll go to you.
Safest is an interesting way to
phrase
that.
It.
Yeah. I'd say it depends on how you want to term safest.
Right now, he is an 8th-round pick.
Right, because you're talking about like late
tight end 9.
Yeah, and for my rankings, I have him at 9. You have him at 10. I'd say he's probably the safest because the next reasonable competitor would be Dallas Goedert, but I have to imagine, I didn't pull it, but there's got to be a difference in where Dallas Goedert is going in drafts.
Goddard's going 1 round ahead of him. That's it.
Yeah, then I'd rather Goedert.
I'd rather Goedert a round ahead than.
I'd rather Goedert a round ahead.
See, the problem is it's not so much that he's the safest or not the safest. It's all about positioning. So to me, Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. I mean, it's basically the same thing. It was for all those years in Philadelphia, and they're basically going to do the same thing and have the same issues here. But I'd rather spend it on the youth and on a team where they're probably going to have to throw the ball more in Philadelphia. And he's got that proven connection with Jalen Hurts.
It's also just significantly less crowded.
Right. But I would rather spend 1 round more on Goddard than use an 8th round pick on Ertz when after Ertz, the next, tight ends going are like Pat Freiermuth, Mike Gesicki, Cole Kmet, 3 or 4 rounds later.
You got some Dawson Knox in there.
So if I'm not getting Dallas Goedert in the 7th, I'm just punting tight end all the way until the 12th, 13th round and feeling fine about it.
Yeah, that's kind of my philosophy as well. That's why I brought up Goddard by name, because if you're talking about it's a 1 round difference, give me Goddard 10 times out of 10. I'll pay the extra round markup if that's something I'm actually interested in. Although for my team construction, I would argue that you just ignore all of this and take 2 tight ends near the end of the draft, and don't even worry about taking them. Like if you don't get one of the top 2 guys, I literally don't care anymore, and I'm just waiting all the way to the end, and I'll build my team that way. That's my preference for 2022 redraft.
Any pushback on that at all, Mike?
I do think that 8th round ADP is a bit rich for a Zach Ertz.
Steep.
Yeah. So I mean, because when he got there last season, they split up Goddard and Ertz went to Arizona. So from week 7 on, he was 2nd in the league among tight ends and targets. That's great. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were, red zone targets and stuff. It was mostly with Hopkins not on the field. So there's going to be question marks because what happens when Hopkins gets back on the field? It's going to look like probably Moore and in 4, receiver sets, Moore and Ertz in the slot, and then you got Hollywood Brown and Hopkins on the outside. It's a great field of team to field, but I don't know how many of those targets Ertz is going to get then.
Yeah.
It's very crowded.
Yeah.
I'm not paying. I don't want to spend up for an 8th round pick hardly at all on tight end in general, especially not for something like this.
Well, I will throw in the obligatory defense and kicker. Matt Prater, of course, ADP 7. He's my number 9 kicker. If that's what floats your boat, you go for it. If he's available there for you in the last round, he's all yours. Go ahead. Defense-wise, I think they're still going to be pretty good defensively. They have an okay schedule. It's not terrible in terms of strength of schedule. To me, I've got the Cardinals at number 8. I've got them as a top 10 defense just because of their ability to take the ball away and cause turnovers and not give up a ton of points either. However, they're going 22 in ADP. So there you go. If you're looking for a value in the 15th round of your 16-round draft, the Arizona Cardinals defense, you can do worse. And that's basically it. Any closing thoughts for the Cardinals, gentlemen?
I'm just glad we don't have to talk about Andy Isabella anymore. Glad we're finally done with that.
Look, we almost got through the whole show without him even being mentioned.
No. I got to toss it. All the hurt that I've had to. No. I had to throw that in there on the way out.
No.
I can't remember talking about Andy Isabella very much. So
we've been doing this for years, Mike. There was a point in time. There was a point in time where Andy Isabella was a topic.
Yeah.
Consider yourself lucky.
Yeah, you dodged a bullet, sir.
I waited till he got done. He was essentially pushed off the roster, and then I was like, now I should join the podcast.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for everybody tuning in for the Cardinals. Next up tomorrow, we will be talking about the Atlanta Falcons.
Significantly shorter show.
That'll be fun.
Shorter show.
Until then, everybody, keep up the nonsense.
I'm Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, and you can find all the guys at ImportantNonsense.com. Kaboom!